NASCAR just proved their rulebook only applies to some drivers. Mate, there's a version of this penalty report where Shane van Gisbergen loses points tonight, and it's not the one that got published. And honestly, once you hear the full story, you might start wondering how many other no penalty calls have gone down exactly like this one. Right, let's set the scene properly. This is Chicagoland, the Aero 400, Stage 1, and it all comes down to one moment in Turn 3. SVG's Trackhouse Chevy makes contact with the left rear of Austin Hill's Richard Childress racing car, and Hill gets spun hard into the outside wall. Hill's night is done right there. The contact leaves his number 33 with terminal rear-end damage, and he ends up credited with 37th, while SVG salvages a 25th place finish out of what was left of his race. But here's the kicker. Before Hill even gets towed to the garage, he sideswipes Van Gisbergen's car under caution on his way in. So you've got two separate incidents in the same race. NASCAR's answer to both? No penalties. Not one. Fair dinkum, none. Now before we go further, quick thing mate, we're closing in on 500 subscribers on this channel, which honestly still blows my mind for a channel that just breaks down penalty reports and radio chatter for a living. If you're finding this stuff useful, hit subscribe, drop a like, and if you've got a mate who's just as annoyed about this ruling as you are, send it their way right now. That's genuinely how a channel this size keeps growing and keeps getting the breakdown out before the bigger outlets even touch it. Right, back to the story, because it gets better. This wasn't some isolated dust-up out of nowhere. Team owner Richard Childress reportedly called the move blatant payback for California, pointing back to a wreck weeks earlier in San Diego, where Hill had taken out both Connor Zilisch and Van Gisbergen in the same incident. SVG himself said afterwards he'd been collected by the same driver 2 weekends running and didn't hold back describing him. And this beef goes back even further than that. Hill and Van Gisbergen have history stretching to a Circuit of the Americas incident back in 2024, when both were still running the Xfinity Series full-time. This one's been simmering for 2 years. Chicagoland wasn't the start. It was just the loudest chapter yet. So how does NASCAR actually decide who gets penalized? Let's get under the bonnet for a second, because this is the part nobody explains properly. NASCAR's competition strategist began studying throttle, steering and braking data almost immediately after the incident, then went back through the entire race the following day. Officials go through every single radio transmission from both cars, looking for what they themselves call a smoking gun. Translation, for the casual viewer, unless a driver basically admits it on the radio, NASCAR won't officially call it intentional, no matter what the data shows, no matter how it looked on the replay. NASCAR's own VP of Communications, Mike Ford, put it plainly on the Hauler Talk podcast. There was nothing definitive that said the contact was 100% intentional, penalty-worthy, even though he admitted it was, in his words, certainly questionable. Questionable. That's NASCAR's own word for it. And they still handed out nothing. Now compare that to Ryan Preece. Weeks earlier at Texas, Preece was fined $50,000 and docked 25 points for intentionally wrecking Ty Gibbs. Why the completely different outcome? Because in that case, radio chatter and Preece's own post-race comments confirmed to NASCAR the contact was deliberate. As Ford explained it himself, we have a pretty consistent history. If you say you're going to do it and then do it, that is going to rise to the level of a penalty. You've removed any kind of doubt. So read between the lines here, mate. The official standard isn't really what happened on the racetrack. It's whether you were unlucky or honest, enough to say it out loud first. And the reaction from the paddock tells you everything you need to know about how this landed. Denny Hamlin, who's actually been publicly campaigning for more driver self-policing, on his own podcast, reacted to the penalty report with a confused GIF when Fox's Bob Pockrass posted the ruling on X. Pokras's post is worth reading exactly as it went out. No penalties for intentional wrecking from Chicagoland. Only penalty is 2 race suspensions to 2 Clements pit crew members for wheel coming off. 2 pit crew guys got suspended for a loose wheel. 2 Cup drivers involved in on-track payback got nothing. Even NASCAR's own senior VP of competition, Elton Sawyer, more or less shrugged off Hill's retaliation move. He reportedly said he would have done the same thing 30 years ago, back when he was a driver himself. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement of the process, is it? That's the establishment quietly admitting the standard is soft. NASCAR says there's no smoking gun radio message here. Stick with me though, because there's one detail buried in how NASCAR explained this decision that changes how you should read absolutely everything that comes next. Here's that detail. Ford confirmed NASCAR is bringing Hill and Van Gisbergen into the hauler this weekend at Echo Park Speedway, specifically to make sure this doesn't boil over into a significant problem at Atlanta or beyond. Now think about that for a second, mate. If NASCAR was genuinely confident this whole thing was settled, why call a meeting at all? You don't schedule a sit-down over something you've fully closed the book on. That hauler meeting is NASCAR quietly admitting, without saying it outright, that they're not actually sure the no penalty call ends anything. It's worth noting, they're not the first drivers to get this treatment either. NASCAR's used the same move historically with Brad Keselowski and Denny Hamlin, and Tony Stewart and Brian Scott, back when those rivalries needed cooling off. So this is a well-worn playbook. The difference is, this time it's playing out with a chase spot on the line. And the timing genuinely couldn't matter more. SVG is sitting right in that playoff picture, fighting to stay inside the top 16, and any further retaliation from Hill could realistically knock him out of chase contention before the postseason even begins. This isn't a throwaway mid-pack scrap anymore, mate. It's championship stakes, plain and simple. So where does this actually go from here? A few ways I can see it playing out. 1. NASCAR quietly tightens up that smoking gun standard, so the next incident like this gets penalized off the data alone, without needing a driver to confess on the radio first. 2. Hill or SVG take matters into their own hands at Atlanta, and NASCAR gets forced into a far harder call than the one they just managed to avoid. 3. This becomes the moment other drivers around the garage start testing exactly how hard you can hit someone, as long as you never say it out loud beforehand. Now, has NASCAR officially confirmed any of that? No, none of it's locked in, and I want to be upfront about that. This is where the pattern points, based purely on how they've handled it every other time. But I'll say it with confidence anyway, because their own track record backs it up. Right. I genuinely want to know what you reckon. Type payback in the comments if you think NASCAR let this slide, because SVG and Hill are both stars they don't want to bench heading into the playoffs. Type consistent if you honestly think this was the right call, and the Priest situation was different enough to justify it. And either way, drop a comment below, because I read every single one, and if this breakdown actually helped you make sense of the ruling, share it with the mate who's still arguing about it online right now. Next time, we're going deep on exactly what gets said in that Atlanta hauler meeting between Hill and Van Gisbergen, and whether NASCAR's boil-over strategy actually works long-term or just quietly delays the inevitable. That's NASCAR Racing Central. We'll see you at the front.